Well, first off, thank you again for being here today. And I was wondering if maybe you could just briefly introduce yourself once and sort of say who you are and what your role is.
I'm Johanna Mair. I'm a professor of organization management and leadership here at the Heritage School of Governance. I'm also the academic editor of Stanford Social Innovation Review and affiliated with the Center on Philanthropy and Civil Society at Stanford University.
Great. So first, kind of jumping right in, on the Stanford Social Innovation Review, one of the most read articles is titled Social Entrepreneurship, The Case for Definition. In your opinion, or to you, what does social entrepreneurship mean?
Social entrepreneurship means a different thing to different people. And obviously there are geographical foci, there are kind of sectoral foci, what is also projected into the labels. In a way I see it as a label, but ultimately what it is about is really finding novel solutions to problems, social problems, environmental problems that we haven't really been able to tackle effectively or efficiently through markets or through also public solutions that are available.
Okay. Your research explores how institutions stifle and enable social and economic progress, right? So for you, what critical elements need to be in place so that institutions can achieve real social progress?
Well, perhaps I need to step back a little bit and make more explicit what I understand when I say institutions. It's less so organizations as institutions, but more institutions of rules of the game. And here we distinguish between formal institutions, basically laws or well-perceived formal institutions, so to say, and informal institutions. Formal institutions refer to rules of the game that we also take for granted, but they come from your cultural environment, norms, tradition, customs. And the interplay between formal institutions and informal institutions actually very often create barriers towards social change. And for example, if we think about also yet another label that we often hear, inclusive development. A lot of our development efforts are geared towards empowering women, turning them into market participants, and so on, but we often forget that informal institutions, informal rules of the game locally prevent women from accessing markets, from actually even going beyond their house, because it's norms and religious beliefs that basically constrain women to a very confined social space. So in a way, a lot of the initiatives that I study under the rubric social entrepreneurship have as an objective social change that includes an economic aspect, but at the same time also includes an element of institutional change. So basically critically assess what are these formal and informal institutions that prevent us from making progress.
Okay. And then can you give an example of some sort of institutional change that would need to happen in order to enable real social progress? So one specific maybe example to make,
Yeah, that's, for example, again, like institutional entrepreneurship means different things to different people and is also locally, the meaning is locally dependent. So in a lot of the work, empirical work, research work that I do in developing countries, one of the institutions that needs to be fostered is actually gender inequality. So if we are able to actually bring gender equality, it's much easier to unleash the potential that is involved in many of the well-intended development projects, but also social entrepreneurial projects. But if you think about gender inequality as a stubborn institutional arrangements that's based on very sticky rules, norms, informal institutions, that institutional change in that area, overcoming gender inequality, for example, would be a very important driver of further development.
Okay, so it's also sort of looking at the root cause and
absolutely
rather than sort of solving the
yes.
symptoms, but going that step deeper.
At the same time, you can then also think about institutional enablers in contexts like we are here in Germany. What are some of the institutions, and here probably formal institutions, that allow us to make progress? Perhaps a more enabling legal environment for social enterprises. Very often we are constrained by the legal form that, if you are a social entrepreneur, think about setting up an organization. How do you set it up? It is either going to be a for-profit organization or a charity. Well, you would like to find a middle way, and you don't have any kind of ready-to-use legal form available. If you think about more informal institutions that might prevent us here, for example, in Germany, to do more, it's this cultural norm that failing is actually bad, and you get stigmatized if your effort or your venture is not successful in the first place. The tricky thing in social entrepreneurship is there is hardly any chance that you get it right in the very first place. You need to experiment, but in a controlled way, in order to actually find out which intervention works. So overcoming this cultural norm of failure is bad would be an important enabler in an environment, for example, such as Germany.
Yeah, definitely. A bit of a topic change. Millennials have often been referred to as the lazy generation, and also as a generation that wants to give back or wants to contribute to social change. So given your role here at the Hertie School as a professor of organization, management, and leadership, what's your perception of this generation, and what do you think is important to them as they get ready for their professional careers and as you interact with these students?
One way of how I look at that generation is that it's the generation that, rightly so, has decided that they will define success on their own terms. And this is where we struggle or lag behind in trying to understand or be open about a career, thinking about career opportunities that actually allow to combine or integrate social and economic and then other kind of objectives into one career. And that's, I think, the biggest challenge, less so for the millennials, but for us as educators, and more importantly for companies, for organizations that actually need talent. I'm not so sure that I agree with the laziness thing, so I don't know where that is coming from, based on which evidence that is said. And on the more giving part, obviously there is this giving part that is related to what I mentioned in terms of combining social and economic concerns. That's basically present in I would say 90% of the people that I interact, and especially in the students that we have here at the Hertie School. But the giving back is a more a philanthropic endeavor, is obviously very pronounced in a geographic region where I spend a lot of time in Silicon Valley, where a lot of millennials, if you will, they become millionaires out of their dorm, of their college dormitory, because they become successful overnight, so to say. Think about Facebook and so on. So their question is also, how can I become a philanthropist at the age of 25? Mm-hmm. And you see many of them actually struggling with that, in the sense of how much should I take on the learning or the models of previous generation of philanthropists, and how much or in which way can I carve out a way for myself or for my generation. And I think that's the exciting thing to observe at the moment, their own experimentation along the way. And I'm sure there will be some people who will find their way, some others who might go for more imitating previous ways of doing philanthropy, but I'm confident that will also help us to reshape the way philanthropy works in the future.
That sort of brings me nicely to my next question, speaking about philanthropy, because you're currently working on a project that focuses on the emergence of venture philanthropy in Europe, right? So how do you think does venture philanthropy in Germany compare to venture philanthropy in the rest of Europe and maybe even the US, for example?
Yeah, together with my colleague Lisa Hehenberger, we were fortunate to actually be there at a time when venture philanthropy was becoming a topic here in Europe. It was relatively later to the US, but started on very different footings. So compared to the US, obviously European, the founders in Europe had a little bit of more experience that they could rely on from the US. And also in Europe, they started to create an association about venture philanthropy, which played a little bit the role of an anchor tenant, a platform for how the field evolved. And what we have observed over the years is different phases in the beginning where venture philanthropists very much kind of had the ambition to reinvent philanthropy on their terms, using venture capital impact or venture capital private equity principles to the world of philanthropy, to the world of a social sector, and basically saying we can change the world by just using our principles of venture capital, towards a phase where there was a very humbling moment where they understood, hey, perhaps there are some complexity involved in, how in addressing social problems that are not exactly the same as you would face when actually launching a new product or a new service. And then the next phase was really trying to understand, together with traditional foundations who have done, philanthropy for a long time here in Europe, to understand what can we learn from traditional philanthropic foundations. At the same time, what went on is traditional philanthropic foundations trying to understand, can we do more to be efficient and effective? This was kind of in the fashion of being more strategic philanthropy. So two trends actually merged.
Okay, so continuing on, kind of going from the topic of venture philanthropy back to social entrepreneurship, looking ahead, what do you see, or how do you see social entrepreneurship developing? And what do you think really needs to happen so that it's sort of more mainstream in terms of people, or millennials specifically, but everyone really thinking of it as like a viable career path?
There are two things. I think social entrepreneurship will become much more important in the next decade, which means like that in Germany, for example, the social welfare organization will take this more seriously and think about it being entrepreneurial inside. At the more international platforms, it's now that we see international development banks trying to understand how they can be more innovative inside, so in social innovation from the inside out. Equally, we see government agencies trying to experiment with things, so it's moving away from social entrepreneurship as forming a new social venture towards social entrepreneurship within organizations, but also long established social sector organizations, how they can kind of become, or what is meaningful innovation for them. And here I want to also say that I'm not necessarily of the belief that innovation is the holy grail in the social sector. It's a nice way to rejuvenate an organization, and I think that's the potential that I see for established organizations. When it comes to mainstreaming it, I think that's something that I care a lot about. And for me, mainstreaming it means that we also, as educators, do not necessarily teach it at siloed courses, but really integrated the topic more into regular courses. In my case, that would be integrated into leadership, into the policy making process. so that it becomes really kind of a natural in the very different subject matters that we teach our students, be it here at HETI, at the School of Public Policy, a School of Governance, but also in business school, that it becomes not an isolated course, but it's in a strategy course, in a human resources course, in an operation course, in a finance course. You have social entrepreneurship somehow embedded.
So it's sort of normalized then in our discourse.
Yes, that's the way to put it, yeah.
And then the last question is, what makes you the changer?
My role as a changer is to empower others to be the changer, especially the next generation of decision makers. That's really my own interpretation of my own role in this. At the same time, it's also the research that I do in collaboration with others has always this relevance aspect. So, for example, at the moment, together with Christian Selos, we are trying to understand, is there a capacity for continuous innovation in established social sector organization? And this is research that unfolds with and on organization. So it's by definition also trying to empower organizations themselves to take the next step.
Great. Well, thank you so much again.
Thank you.